Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the AB Report. Unfortunately, we're going to start the day off with a little sad news. The late, great comedian Norm Macdonald has left our world. He's gone on to the next world. I have to wish him a restful journey. Rest in peace, Norm Macdonald. Good old Norm. He was one of the funniest comedians I've ever seen, hands down. And that includes comedians like Dave Chappelle and Eddie Murphy. Norm just had this, this deadpan humor, oftentimes silly humor, that only he could make funny. He was a hell of a guy, hell of a comedian. He happened to have passed away from cancer after having gone through it for 9 years. That's quite a long time to have to deal with cancer treatment and such. And, a lot of people that aren't aware don't realize how debilitating not just cancer is, but the treatment for cancer is. Chemotherapy, the radiation therapy, the surgery. It is quite a taxing ordeal. I had no idea that Norman was only 61 years old upon his passing, because when I saw him in some recent appearances, he looked a lot older, to be honest with you. He looked like he was, definitely in his mid to late 70s. But he was only 61 years old. The effects of the treatment and the burden that the cancer has on you can really put a lot of years on a person. It's quite a thing to go through. It's a terrible disease. There are all types of cancer, brain cancers, lung cancers, and none of them are good. I've had loved ones that have gone through it themselves. Some of them have survived and some have not. And, that's the way life goes sometimes. So, I'm going to send my thoughts and prayers out to his family and his friends. And I will fondly remember the great Norm Macdonald. All right, well, moving on to other things. I'm going to have to talk about the man that I refer to as Silly Millie. General Mark Milley. Silly Millie. He is now in the news because of some of his outrageous behavior that was documented in a book that's been released. About his outrageous... the book wasn't about him, but it happened to include some passages about him and statements that he made while he was, under the command of Donald Trump, when Donald Trump was president. And to be honest, at this point in time, I think that General Milley, Silly Milley, should just go ahead and be arrested wherever he is, whatever he happens to be doing, whether he's on vacation or taking it easy in his cottage, or in his comfortable bed or bunk, or wherever he happens to be, whether he's over at the Pentagon in his office. There should be an immediate raid by the military police or the FBI to drag him from wherever he is and throw him into a cell at Fort Leavenworth, where he should remain until it is time for his military tribunal, at which time, if he should be found guilty, the penalty for treason is execution. That's it. You say, well, what could he have done that was so bad? Well, what Silly Milley did while he was working under Trump, he stated himself that he acted of his own accord to prevent Trump from misusing nuclear weapons with China. Now, how silly is that? President Trump went into office, and while he was there, he did not escalate war with other countries. Did not attempt to get the United States further into any war than we had already been. And he did not initiate any new wars. So what would possess Silly Milley to take it upon himself to do what he considered preventing Trump from misusing nuclear weapons? I mean, for one thing, let's just say for some reason President Trump decided that there should be a nuclear attack on wherever. How in the hell would Silly Milley stop him? If Silly Milley refused to take an order to proceed, if he was even in the line of command to execute such an order, and if he did not comply, he would simply be removed. Or he would be forced to retire his position. Or he would just be removed for insubordination. Now, it's not just outrageous that he said he acted to do such a thing. But what he said that he did in support of that is where the treason lies. Milley has stated that he secretly contacted his counterpart in China in response to what he perceived as President Trump's likelihood to go to war with China. And he did this in order to, cut Trump off at the pass, so to say. I just can't find the words to describe how outrageous this person is. And I reiterate, he ought to be dragged from wherever he is and thrown in a cell in Fort Leavenworth. He's a traitor. And this is treason. Well, speaking of China, China has an authoritarian, top-down, iron-fisted government is run by the Chinese Communist Party and whoever the head of the Chinese Communist Party happens to be. And at this time, that is Xi Jinping. And Xi does not play around. You know, if Millie had been a military commander under Xi, he would be, and he had contacted, you know, the United States and spoken with his counterpart about the ruler of China. Xi would have just killed him instantly. He would have had him killed. There would have been no trial, no nothing. He would have been disappeared. Kapoof, gone, done with. You know, that's not how we do things over here in America, but, you know, China is a different kind of a country. You know, and a lot of Americans would view that pretty harshly. You know, and it is pretty harsh. You know, you can't even joke about the head of China right now. You know, a lot of people used to joke and say that he looked like Winnie the Pooh. Well, guess what? All images of Winnie the Pooh have been removed from the internet in China. It's nowhere to be found. It's against the law. Because the law is whatever he says it is. And that's a pretty that's a pretty jagged pill to swallow, you know. Well, even in an authoritarian, overbearing dictatorship like China, sometimes they do get things right. Everything is not, you know, terrible. Everything is not bad over there. Because even though they are an authoritarian society, they still do care about the future of their country, of their nation, of their people. And in order for that nation to exist, they have to do certain things to remove things which are detrimental to that society. As such, China has now banned effeminate men from being on television, on the internet, in advertisements. Poof, gone. No more sissy boys. You're out of here. You know, they even have done this with like Hollywood types of actresses and actors. One day they're popular and have millions of followers. The next day, they're gone from the internet. Nowhere to be found. Their images are wiped away. Done. And, you know, our country could, you know, benefit from some of those same types of policies. You know, not that it will ever happen, but, you know, even a broken clock is right twice a day. Speaking of our country and the way we do things over here, There has been a recent edict from the Department of Justice to all of their branches of law enforcement, which restricts the use of chokeholds and no-knock entries, most no-knock entries. And I don't know if that's the wisest thing to do. After all, sometimes you just gotta choke a mofo. You know what I mean? Some people are uncontrollable and get out of order and will fight you tooth and nail, and shy of using, a deadly weapon against them. Sometimes you have to apply some pretty tough physical measures. And, believe it or not, with the right training, placing someone in a chokehold isn't necessarily something that's going to harm them in any great way. It can incapacitate them, and it can do so in a brief period of time, so that that person can be taken into custody and gain control of. Some of these people that are being arrested, they're just completely out of control. They will fight you tooth and nail, and if you're trying to be gentle with them, or you're trying to take them by the arm or handcuff them, and they're not cooperating, and they're not just resisting you, but they're fighting you. They're swinging, they're kicking, they're biting. When you go hands-on, you have to be able to neutralize that person. I think a lot of people, including law enforcement officers, as well as suspects, are going to end up being hurt because of this policy. Officers are going to get hurt because they weren't able to quickly gain control of a person, and suspects are going to be hurt because after an officer is not able to get a person under control, and that person presents a significant enough threat, then the force is escalated. And it goes from, from physical, but from hands-on to non-lethal, if you have it, to lethal. And a lot of people are going to be injured more so because of these restrictions than with them having been in place. And they have also, at the DOJ, decided that no-knock entries should not take place. And, the reasoning, of course, behind all of this is the George Kirby incident. And everybody knows who George Kirby is. Just ask Nancy Pelosi. She'll tell you, if you don't know. They say George Kirby was suffocated from a chokehold. Because an officer placed his knee on the back of his neck and the top of his back, and which is absolutely silly because the way that someone is injured from a chokehold or incapacitated or even killed from a chokehold is for the flow of blood to the brain through the carotid arteries, or the flow of air into the lungs, by putting enough pressure on the larynx, it's cut off. And there's no way to place pressure on the carotid arteries by putting pressure on the back of the neck. Because the carotid arteries are not at the back of the neck. They're on the side. And there's no way to cut off someone's air by putting pressure on the back of their neck. It just is physically impossible. Now, the other aspect is of this order, the no knock entry part, has to do with the killing of, what was the young lady? Breonna Taylor. As though the no knock entry had something to do with her death. It had absolutely nothing to do with her death. And the reason why it's so plain and clear that it didn't is because a no-knock warrant was issued to search her premises and to place her under arrest. However, when the police were on the scene, they made the decision to knock on the door and to announce themselves, which they did very loudly, so much so that the neighbors were roused and heard the police announcing themselves and knocking on that door. So Breonna Taylor knew what was going on. She heard them. There's no way that she didn't hear them. She was accompanied with her boyfriend, who heard them as well. But this knucklehead decided to shoot one of the police officers once they breached the door. The police officers returned fire, and unfortunately, Breonna Taylor was caught in the crossfire and she was shot. And she died of her injuries. But that is the fault of the stupid boyfriend that decided to shoot at the police instead of surrendering. Has absolutely nothing to do with a no-knock warrant. You know, had the warrant not been a no-knock warrant, the same thing would have happened. Because they did announce themselves. They did knock on the door. So this is a lot of performative gesturing on the part of the DOJ. And it's going to lead to problems, you know, even with the no-knock warrants, because no-knock warrants are issued in cases where police have to get in quickly and neutralize whatever's going on inside that abode. Oftentimes weapons are present, and it's a dangerous, volatile situation, and they have to get in there. And they have to have the element of surprise on their side so that they can get in there, neutralize the situation, and not be harmed themselves. And it prevents the people inside from being harmed as well, because they're caught off guard and they're taken into custody. And thousands upon thousands of these warrants are issued and executed around the country on a daily basis and do not end up with anyone being killed. Most of the time when someone gets killed involving the police, it's because they acted out of violence and presented a threat to the police. You know, so instead of police reform, maybe there ought to be some criminal reform. Just give up and take your ass to jail. Stop fighting and shooting at the police. How about that? Well, that's going to do it for me today, or this morning anyway. Hopefully I'll be back at you later on this afternoon, and hopefully things will just continue to get a little better. Day at a time. This has been the AB Report. See ya when I see ya.